You're listening to The Watchers, a show where two women from opposite ends of New Jersey watch TV about all the different ways that the world can end.
We're really in it now, aren't we, Jodie?
So in it. Oh my God. Yes. We watched Silo, Vertical Snowpiercer, as I've started calling it. Less colorful Fallout.
Totally. But
depressing Station 11.
And still, as I said before,
Last of Us without the mushrooms.
It kind of is. Before we really get into it.
Wait. Who are you?
Oh, I'm Andrea.
And I'm Jodie.
And
okay,
we watched
there we go.
Silo.
We watched Silo. Yes.
We love a mid-century modern dystopia.
Totally. I mean, I am a mid-century modern nut in my taste in real life, so I love seeing all that stuff. But
oh, totally.
They don't make it look very happy.
No, but the mystery of how long has the silo been there seems pretty obvious to me.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we got a lot of the same sort of furniture styles as I'm already losing what we just talked about as Fallout.
I know.
I think Station 11 is sort of the outlier when it comes to that.
Yeah, Station 11
in a lot of ways, actually.
I was going to say, just kind of is the outlier.
Yeah.
I watched all of Station 11.
Yeah, I forgot. I was actually going to bring this up. I'm glad you did.
Listeners. Oh, I'm crying. I'm already crying.
Doesn't take much.
If you only watched the pilot and somehow were able to stop yourself from watching the rest of the show.
Oh my God.
You are missing out.
You're a monster.
You're a monster and you're missing out. My housemate watched it with me and watched it for the sort of mystery of it, but it was they said at one point, they're I'm just watching to find out what happens and to find out what's going on.
Wow.
And I was truly personally offended. I was I love these people with every cell in my body.
Yeah. Yeah. Is this the first pilot that we've covered where you hadn't seen it and you went and watched the rest of it?
Fallout.
I think it is.
Fallout.
Oh, Fallout. Yeah.
But
yeah, that's true.
That I feel sort of that doesn't count because it's so current.
I just feel this is the one that, because there's some of these are shows neither of us have seen, but many of them are one of ours, you know?
Totally.
And Station 11 was one that I brought to the podcast. And so the fact that it stuck with you enough that you watched the whole thing in a week.
And I'm sad
somehow
that
feels like I won.
Yeah, you totally did. And that's
what it's about.
Hold on, you've done it with 2 shows at least. Wow.
What's the other one?
Huh? You tell me. What's the other show that you introduced me to that?
The one that started this podcast, you mean?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, fine. Yes. I think I'm still stinging from the fact that you didn't start watching 6 Feet Under. That's all.
Station 11 is so perfectly up my alley. Everything about it.
I know.
I couldn't have loved it more.
It's so beautiful.
I
rewatched it this week as well.
Beautiful, and it feels so good to watch, and it's so weird in a way that's it's kind of quietly weird.
Yes.
And there's a scene in, I know the moment where I was oh, this is a show I'm going to be obsessed with and rewatch all the time forever. Yeah. And I will just say it's a scene between Frank and Kirsten and Jeevan in their apartment.
I knew that would be the scene. And that's episode 7.
I was having a great time all the way through. I think it's a pretty perfect show, but I was just oh, this is different. But again, it really is that. It just felt so tailored for me. It was Andrea, what took you so long to get here?
I feel it's interesting to think about. So as someone who's watched the show already, what is the scene that you're waiting for someone else to watch, right?
It's the gateway scene.
Yeah. Well, because when you think about when you were watching Yellow Jackets for the first time.
It's the plane.
It's the plane exploding, right? I'm waiting for the reaction to that moment.
Station 11, that moment is the moment.
So good. It's so good. to me, there's a couple of moments in that show that really like stab you in the heart. That's one of them, weirdly. One of the other ones is not the very, very end, but in the last episode when sort of something important comes back around that
I shrieked. I was so happy.
It's so good. It's like, this is what I meant when I said last week, like, it ties things up in a really neat package in a way that might annoy me in another show or at a different time.
This is why I just put my finger there, like such
you did
an act, like just such a like. But if you, I want to do a whole. I just want to talk about this show and Shakespeare, because that's just how it like. That's how Shakespeare plays end. Tidily, whether comedy or tragedy, they end in a tidy way. Yeah,
and like I think that sometimes I like that and sometimes I don't. But watching this while we were still dealing with like rising cases and people refusing to mask in public and all that horrible like, you know, anger and concern and worry, and people were still getting like, we're still learning about long COVID. Like it was just such a rough. It still is, but it was such a rough time, and like. I needed that moment in episode 10 so badly.
Yeah. There's only one problem for me with the series. And it is, I'll bleep this, but I will tell you, Jodie, and then maybe you can help me, is that they and managed to move on from that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think it's interesting because like, it's trying to have really high stakes and really low stakes at the same time. Like, what are the actual stakes of Station 11, right? There's the prophet who's got a bunch of kids that he's like his little army going around causing trouble, blowing shit up. So this is one thing I wanted to talk about, actually, maybe to loop us back around, is in these apocalypse shows, like, what is the big bad, right? What is the thing that our heroes are fighting against? And so often it's an establishment, it's a secret government, it's a cabal of like powerful people. In this case, it's a scared kid who like has a bunch of other scared kids. Like that's very, very different than what we have in like Fallout, Fallout, Silo.
And the really fascinating thing, welcome to our Station 11 recap. The thing that I loved so much, I mean, there's a million things I love so much about Station 11, but with you saying that is that like everybody in their little troops or like factions or whatever in Station 11, because we've got Airport and we've got a few others, but they all think somebody else is that governing thing, but we all know that's not the case pretty much immediately. So we just get to watch all of these people interact and we're like, we're not against any of them really. I mean, the prophet a little bit at first for sure, but it's pretty clear early on what's going on with him to an extent, at least that he's not
really damaged.
And not really running the show in a way that the other people seem to think he is.
I think it's interesting, though. I mean, I haven't read the book, which you said you were going to after you finished watching, but apparently in the book, he is pretty fucking evil. Like, they softened him a lot for this.
Oh, I'm glad they did.
Yeah. In the book, he has very few redeeming qualities and is quite a bit more sort of heinous. So
that's so interesting because so much of this show depends on people, like, you know, like interacting and learning to understand each other. And I'm interested to hear what you think of the book after you read it, because I haven't read it, but the things I've read about the differences, some of them to me are really positive, like having Jeevan and Kirsten interact so much and it being about their relationship. I was going to say that's the whole show for me.
Everything
is the whole show for me, but like they're really the whole show for me.
Yeah, but I wonder what it will change to have the prophet be even more of an evil force versus a broken kid that does evil shit.
Well, and I think that's why the thing that I bleeped is so out of character, or not out of character, is so is like a step too far in the show, because that feels like a bet in the book I'll bet it does totally make sense.
I think you're totally right. I think that that's sort of a piece of the book that without some more, without the darker direction that the book takes that character, maybe feels a little out of place.
Right. I will say the scene when you realize what's happening works so well and is so fucking chilling. That shot where you see that begin to kick off is...
Kids are fucking creepy, man.
Yeah. When all those kids start popping up in that field. Okay, anyway, I'm so sorry. Silo.
No, it's okay. We can talk about it. I know. So what I'm wondering is maybe at some point we do a non-pilot related Station 11 episode.
10 million
where
listeners.
We can really get into it.
Season 1 of Patreon. How is there a fly in my underground bunker?
There's a crack somewhere. The poison's getting in. The poison's getting in. Get the tape. Okay. Silo. It's a show about silo.
It is a show about a silo. You're so right. Based on a series of short stories that later became a series of novels by Hugh Howey.
Yeah.
Which people love those books.
Yeah. Interestingly, originally self-published on Amazon Direct or whatever the heck that is, which is wild. It's like the Twilight of... wasn't it Twilight that was like originally self-published?
Well, Twilight was fanfic. And then
fanfic.
50 Shades of Grey is Twilight fanfic.
God. Yeah. So this is apocalypse fanfic that really took off.
I'm sorry. The actually in me... Twilight isn't technically fanfic. It is, although all adaptations are kind of fanfic if you think about it, but Twilight is a retelling of Wuthering Heights, and then 50 Shades of Grey is fanfiction, is Twilight fanfiction.
Thank you for clarifying.
But apparently if you write fanfiction about a series that is 200 years old, then
it's an adaptation.
Then it's an adaptation.
Gotcha. Yes. So this was based on the trilogy of novels, Wool, Shift, and Dust. Originally, though, Wool was like a short story that he published. And then there were other sort of like chapters that came out. And then the whole thing was put together in a book and published.
It's really an interesting publication story.
Yeah, he's a weird, interesting guy. His other sort of like profession / love is sailing. So
I like when people have a thing, you know?
Yeah, I was prepared to find out something problematic about him, and so far I haven't, which is good.
Nice.
He actually posted. I went on a weird rabbit hole trip, but I found like a blog post where he called Elon Musk an asshole. So I was like, all right, okay.
And he's an executive producer on the show, so that's a good sign.
Totally. So, little sort of recap of what the story is about, maybe before we jump in. Set in a dystopian future where a community exists in a giant underground silo comprising 144 levels. Those levels are broken into kind of 3 main sections. There's like the up top, the mids, and the down deep. The names of stuff in sci-fi sometimes like bring out my cringe factor. I'm like, guys, could we not come up with anything better than the down deep?
I know.
But anyway.
Yeah, you could at least call it like the undersea. That's cool.
Yeah, exactly.
At least.
Yeah. There's about 10,000 people living there. They don't know why they're there. They don't know what happened or why they can't go outside. I'm not going to give the exact speech, but you can probably hear it in your head. The silo is more than 300 years old by the time the series begins. And yet it is about 700 years in the future from where we are right now.
We don't know that in the pilot.
Oh, we don't know that in the pilot. Okay.
Because I think that's like a big... Yeah. So one of the big mysteries we'll talk about as we get into questions, but one of them is because of Freedom Day, which this whole episode goes around, where they put down this rebellion. They have,
and that was 140 years ago.
All of their history has been erased. So all we know for sure is that 140, right? Is that how many years ago? 140 years ago, there was a rebellion. And the rebels burned all of our history books, everything we know. So that's sort of like the reset. That's as much as anybody, it seems, as far as we know, as much as anybody in the silo knows. Thank God that we put down those rebels
Right.
before worse could happen. And that's as much as we know about the silo's history. We don't know who built it. Like you said, you can kind of hear that speech in your head. We don't know what the purpose was. We don't know what life is like on the outside. All because even the people in charge, we all got a cultural reset. And it was long enough ago that no one is alive now who was alive then.
Right. So that episode, we basically are introduced to Sheriff Holston Becker and his wife, Ann Perkins. Not in the show. That's Parks and Rec. She's always going to be Ann Perkins to me, though. So iconic.
I want to suggest a new term for media, which is a Becker. And it's a character who shows up in the first episode or beginning of media and then as a sort of set up to be a lead and then disappears, because Casey Becker is the name of Drew Barrymore in Scream.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
I wonder if that's intentional.
I don't know.
Like maybe that. No, it can't be.
Well, no, because I don't know if I have no idea. I don't know enough about the books to know if the Beckers exist. But it is funny that two things we've covered feature.
They do exist.
A more famous actor.
Yeah.
In the beginning of a thing to hook you, who then dies. As far as we know, dies.
Yeah. That's interesting.
So we've got a Becker. It's like a mulligan.
Yeah. We've got two actually, because we've got Holston and Allison, his wife.
Though we don't see Holston go out in this pilot, so we don't know at this point if he actually does.
But we see him getting ready to go out.
Right.
But we're introduced to the two of them. They are notified that they have their third and likely final chance to conceive a child.
Because she's ancient.
Yes, she's 38. She might as well be dead.
She's almost 38, so we might as well,
Her life
grind
is
her
over.
bones up to feed everybody else at this point.
Her uterus is falling out. Kind of later. Sorry, I know it was gross. So she goes to the doctor. They remove her birth control implant, which looks like a bullet, but then they can't have a baby still. Allison meets a woman named Gloria Hildebrandt, who looks like every new age grandma, like is trying to sell you crystals.
Totally.
And not that I don't love crystals, but
or new age grandmas for that matter.
No, absolutely. I hope to be one someday, but not the grandma part. I mean, my whole goal is to be the weird aunt. So
you're on your way.
I am on my way. I mean, I have a niece that I could ask how I'm doing, but Gloria proclaims herself as a fertility expert. And this is where we see Allison have some doubts about the story she's been told about the silo and why they're there and what's not being told to them. And it's what they don't want you to know kind of, setup.
The they in this is so funny because the they is sort of named, right? It's got to be judicial.
They keep saying judicial, when they're talking about who's in control and who would be hiding something.
Yeah, we never meet them as far as we know. But it is interesting that they are named, because I feel like in a lot of these kinds of stories, there's something going on, but not quite what, or they want to keep it hidden from you. They want to tease that there's something else going on, but they're pretty open that they're, as far as we know, because I think the layers of mystery in this show, if you watch past the pilot, are almost kind of difficult to track and parse. But at this point, they seem pretty open about what they're hiding. Does that make sense?
It does, but that also makes me think that that's not the real big bad. Right. Because if it's that obvious from the beginning, it's judicial, that's the problem, then no, it's not. Maybe they're part of it, but...
That's one of the things where I thought I was going to be less interested to talk about this than I am, because I kind of forgot how much of it is we seem to have told you, but did we? But if this is the mystery, then what's this? And there's a lot of that going on in a way that I think is... switch. Yeah, totally.
Yeah. So Allison's trying to get pregnant. Meanwhile, she works in IT in this silo, which is maybe that's where I would end up. I could see that being where I would end up.
I love all of the little... It's like a workplace drama in a way,
I know.
This show.
I know. So through that job, she meets George Wilkins, a person in the mids who is a computer repair person who has come across a relic, which is the term they use a lot in the show, which is something from the before. Mm-hmm. It's an ancient hard drive instead of a scroll. It's like,
I love.
Yeah.
I would love to talk about relics across our 3 dystopias at some point, but
yeah. And so they are able to crack the hard drive. They see a bunch of information about the silo. One of the big rules of the silo is that if you say you want to go out, meaning outside of the silo, that you will, and you will never come back.
And there's no taking that back unless, like, there are some measures in place, but for the most part, if you say it, you're going.
Right. And so if you do say, I want to go out, you go outside the silo and you immediately die, apparently, is what they see on the inside anyway, through the screen that is a video feed, supposedly, of the outside world. Mm-hmm. And so after all of this, she starts to get suspicious of everything going on in the silo. She performs surgery on herself to remove her birth control implant that has not been removed by the doctor, actually, and says she wants to go out.
And she's confident.
Yeah, and so what she has learned through her deep dive into the hard drives, she thinks, is that outside is actually sunny, beautiful, with birds and life and trees, and that they're being lied to inside the silo about what it's like out there. So she decides she wants to go see for herself. Makes a promise that if the outside is beautiful, she'll clean the camera. This is a big thing, being sent out to clean, because the camera that shows them the outside world gets dirty over time and obscured. And so she goes out, she cleans the camera, and then collapses. And then we get 2 years later, Holston is investigating the death of George, the computer guy, and meets Juliette Nichols, who should be gay. I just have to get this out of the way.
I know you can't know that from the pilot, because that's the other thing that I forgot about is we don't even meet her. We see her.
We meet her at the... Yeah, we see her.
But she doesn't, we don't get any words. We don't see anybody else really interact with her. We just see her from afar. But yeah, I kept waiting through the series for some
that
sort of...
That is not a straight character. I'm sorry.
No.
The fact that that's going ahead, but it makes me cry. It makes me crazy. But that's the pilot.
What are your first thoughts about the pilot? Surface.
It's hard to separate that from what I know comes after. Mm-hmm. Because to me, this is setting up a story of 2 people, a couple, one of whom has seemingly gone to her death, believing something that her sort of law enforcement husband thinks is crazy. Mm-hmm. And then something happens in the 2 years after her death that changes his mind. And he follows her. Mm-hmm. And so I don't think that it's like spoilery to say, because we just talked about this. Like you brought it up. The 2 main characters we're introduced to here don't stay the 2 main characters of the show. And so they're more of an introduction to the rules of the world.
Right.
Than they are people for us to grab onto. And I think one of the things we talked about when we were talking last week about comparing this to Station 11 and other shows like it is like, it's hard to get attached to the characters, or harder to get attached to the characters in this. And I think it's because the book doesn't think or the story doesn't think they're as important as the story of Station 11 does. Yeah.
And it's interesting because that's the problem I thought I had with this show before, that I'm kind of now like, it's something we need to think about when, well, we don't have to do anything when we watch TV. We can do whatever we want. But something I would encourage all of us to do is think about, like, what's the show's purpose and what's the show trying to do? And watching this pilot now, I'm like, oh, this isn't... Because I think I said when I recommended the show with a few caveats, and I was like, it's not... I think the atmosphere is cool. I think the setting is really cool. I think the world is interesting. I struggle with the performances and with the characters. But the show is just, I think, overall less concerned with them in the first place.
I think you're right.
I think they're tools to sort of reveal different parts of the various mysteries and the way the world works, but it's not and it makes sense because it's easy to say, because we have said over and over again watching these dystopias, that it's like all these questions are like, what does humanity do in the face of the end of the world? Mm-hmm. But this show is more of like, the genre isn't really dystopian post-apocalypse. The genre is mystery. The setting is this dystopia. And so that's different.
I actually read that it was referred to by an article in The Verge as more of a small town murder mystery that just happens to take place after the world ends.
Yeah, and I think that kind of changes how I feel about the show overall.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's true. I think that it's interesting to think a little bit about the author of the book's view on this. So he, in an interview with Wired, he said, the idea was a world where people live underground in the silo, but their only view of the outside world is a single screen. The idea came to me from moving from a career as a yacht captain, like I said, and traveling wildly and seeing the world and living in it, to being domestic. This is why I was like, maybe there's something weird about this guy. Domesticated by my lovely wife.
Oh, boy. Okay, bud.
And living in one place and relying on TV, the internet, and newspapers to know what the world was like. And it was terrifying to see how different a picture was painted because of those filters.
Right.
You know, the only thing that makes it news is bad news typically. And so it's more about, for him, I think, it's a murder mystery, but it's also this sort of metaphor for mediated experiences of the actual world around you.
Right.
And what that does to people's, like, the way they live and the way they interact with other people and the level of trust that's there or not there, stuff like that. So we're introduced to a lot in this pilot episode, right? We're introduced to the rules of the world. We're introduced to a few characters that stick around and a few that don't. We're introduced to the social structure, which I think is interesting. I can't help but compare it to Station 11, because we just watched it. But in Station 11, it feels like society is kind of a free-for-all now. And it makes sense. They're all outside, traipsing around, walking from place to place or living in one place. But sort of everyone's kind of on their own, and there's no governing body anymore.
And it's a little more unlimited. Like, you can sort of go off and do your own thing, as opposed to the silo, which is what I think something that is really successful, I think, for the silo, the series and the silo, is that it's massive and you feel that. It wants you to know. You see those shots of it straight down and you know it's 140 floors. And when Allison says that she's got to go down to where George lives, she has to leave the day before and stay in a hostel.
Right.
But it also feels so closed in and so surveilled. It's kind of a panopticon in a way.
It is a panopticon, yeah.
So, and it is oppressive and dark and narrow. Although, God, there's a lot packed. There's a lot packed into that, and because of that, nobody has. The freedom is not part, despite the fact of it being called Freedom Day. There's there's no freedom.
No. And I think it's one of those set up as one of those dangerous situations where, like, you have been told that in order to survive, these are the rules you have to follow. And we know better, and we're going to make your life safe and comfortable, but you can't question anything. Right. And so it's interesting because it does reflect the way the silo is set up. It is expansive, but it's also closed in and you are trapped there. So you have kind of what you need to survive, but you have no freedom.
Right.
You know?
It really is the small town murder thing of it. It feels like almost like and they even have mines. They refer to them. We don't see them yet, but they say, like, you get sent out to the mines for that. And it feels like that, like, it's credits. You're, like, spending the company dollar at the company store kind of thing.
Exactly.
There's just no... Yeah. You're stuck forever.
Totally. And in terms of the size of the silo, like that 144 floors, they talk about how it takes a day to walk from the top to the bottom of the silo. The technology in this is interesting. I feel like I created a couple of categories of things that I wanted to talk about. And in the comparison category, it's like what technology exists and what doesn't is super interesting in these places because of like...
They have electricity.
Yeah, but they don't have cameras or an elevator.
They don't have an elevator, and you wouldn't even need... An elaborate pulley system would work in this place. It would be pretty easy.
Which means that it's probably intentional.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah. And so, like, they don't know what cameras are. Mm-hmm. Like, it's just like they all have paintings of each other instead of photos.
Right.
So... I actually found an interview on RogerEbert.com where he asks, like, how did you decide what kind of technology the story would have? And he said, it's a cool mix, right? There's things that are beyond us and things that are primitive. You don't really learn the reason for these decisions until very late in the book series, so it'll be a while. We'll have to get some more seasons of TV to explain that. But whatever went wrong outside on Earth, the people who went through that want it to not happen again. And so the technologies that they blame for that are the technologies they try to hide from the people who left. So maybe somebody died in an elevator accident and they're like, they got the classic severed in half by the closing elevator.
No elevators.
The mayor's dad was killed by an elevator and she was like, absolutely not. Or great-grandfather. Yeah.
That's probably it.
Yeah, I think so.
So interesting because
big elevator is the real problem.
They don't know what cameras are, but they do understand that what they're looking at outside is a screen. Like
right, because it's a video feed from above ground.
They do. It reminds me of, and I'm just going to keep seeding reasons with it, we should eventually watch Battlestar Galactica. One of the things very early on in the show, I think in the miniseries, in fact, yes, is that there's a catastrophic event that happens in the miniseries, and one of the ships that survives is the Galactica, and it is because their computers aren't networked. That sort of clinging to, and so then the computers on that ship are never networked again because it is the one thing that kept them alive. And so that parallels there too, where it's like, well, it's convenient for the show and for the writers to have this be the case, but also there's a good reason in story. And they don't say that.
Elevators are evil.
Exactly. They don't say that outright on Silo, but we can maybe assume that it's something like that.
I mean, one of my weird phobias is elevators. Like, I will use them.
I don't think that's a weird phobia.
Have to,
I think that's one of the big ones.
Is it?
Yeah. Elevator phobia, for sure.
I really hate them. So yeah, the people that we're introduced to in this, the place we're introduced to, but a bunch of stuff is set up in a way that leaves a lot of room for tangents, interpretation, all of those things in the future. Side note, did you know that the guy that plays George Wilkins is the son of Ben Kingsley?
I didn't know that, but he has his name.
Ferdinand Kingsley?
Ferdinand Kingsley is incredible. I didn't know that.
So, yeah, a lot of the actors are British. And I think most of them do a pretty good job with the American accent, other than, like we said. And it's funny, the Swedish accent only comes out when she is, like, talking loudly or yelling.
We get it.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Other folks that we see in this besides, so that's the woman who plays Juliette Nichols is Rebecca Ferguson, I think. Is that her name?
Correct.
Yes. David Oyelowo, who plays Holston Becker.
Charmer, too. Everybody's pretty likable.
Yeah, totally. Ruth Johns. So this is a British actress, Geraldine James. Swoopy clothes with long white hair. Very future leader. Like,
yes.
You know, it's like that look, right? The long swoopy drapey clothing with like the long whitish hair. Mm-hmm. It's such a type in these shows.
Yeah, she feels like I've not seen Dune, but she feels like she's maybe out of Dune.
One thing that I thought about watching this was how many of these apocalypse shows have female leads and yet feel like very classically male shows, if that makes sense.
Yep.
So like in this, we have basically spoiled the not really spoilable fact that our main character ends up being Juliet. Like she's on the posters as the central character, and in Station 11, we've got Kirsten, and they have other people in their lives and they're other main characters, but We'll talk about Last of Us.
Right.
We have
Fallout is Lucy's show if it's
right,
anybody's.
Exactly. Yeah. And then in Last of Us, Pedro Pascal is theoretically our lead character, but Ellie, played by Bella Ramsey, is his pretty immediate equal in a lot of ways. And in some ways you could see her as the main character as well. So it's interesting that all these post-apocalyptic shows have women elevated to these high levels, but yet they do feel like they're from a male perspective for the most part.
Right. Sort of the thing that Fallout, that I like about Fallout, this is so specific, that I struggle with Silo. One of the things is, why is Allison, why is it so important for her to have a baby in this world?
Yeah. I mean, I think that is meant to feel like survival of the species is the most important thing, and it's a privilege to be allowed to do it. She doesn't.
That's how the Silo presents it. And it's also one of those things where it's like, oh, the ultimate way to control a woman is to decide whether or not she's allowed to reproduce.
Absolutely.
That they have to apply for it. And what I like about Fallout is Lucy is so blasé about sex. She's so just like, it's part of her life in a way that is like very much hers to decide. Like there's that scene later in the series where spoiler, I guess, she asks Maximus, because they're just kind of sitting around, if they want to have sex, if he wants to have sex, and he's the one who's like kind of shocked by that.
Right.
And it's frustrating to see that here, where I'm just like, Allison, like,
it's very traditional.
Come on,
male-female relationship. I mean, this is what I meant when I said the show needs to be gayer. Like we talked about how Station 11 is very casually queer last week. Last of Us is also, in my opinion, very casually queer in a lot of ways. And so I think this feels like the most sort of heteronormative of them. Like, to me, when you see Juliet at the end, that is the reveal of like a queer character that you're expecting all of the women watching to fall in love with. But she's also presented in a way that is unthreatening and feminine enough that the men can also sort of find things to appreciate, I guess.
And I don't think it's really a spoiler to say that her main motivation is love. Love is love.
For a relatively mediocre man in IT.
Right. So that stuff is unfortunate.
Especially when she has like this is later on, but a very hot friend who presents very queer.
Jodie.
Later in the like that's clearly her partner, or should be.
Well, and it's funny because like Fallout 2, the thing that forces Lucy above ground is her dad, which is a little better. It's like a little bit cooler that she's the one taking charge now.
Save her dad.
And it's her main adversary is a badass woman, and so that's a little better. And Station 11 does a pretty good job of showing a cross section of humanity where it's like, oh wow, that's our only lead without a real love interest, right? Am I forgetting? Does
Which one?
Kirsten have?
So Kirsten is involved with various people over time, like, but not. A love interest is definitely not her motivation.
No, that's cool. There's even an episode that sort of deals with reproduction and repopulation in Station 11, because you have to, right? You have to talk about whether or not we're going to try to do that, but in a way that kind of pushes against this sort of trope that Silo is not interested in troubling, really.
Right, like the nuclear family, man and woman have a baby, raise that baby kind of thing. Yeah, totally. I think it's also different. There's sort of the Station 11 and Last of Us, which we haven't gotten to yet, version of femininity in the female lead, and then the sort of, I would argue, sort of male gazy version in Fallout and Silo, where our heroine has to be like very physically feminine and perfect while also being strong. And in Station 11, Kirsten looks like a normal person. Yeah. She's attractive, and she sometimes is wearing things that highlight that, but she's also sometimes wearing things that look like she raided a 12-year-old's closet. Like,
sometimes she's just in like jorts.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know if she's ever literally in jorts, but she might as well be in jorts.
And, you know, is a bit female
I love her so much.
if you think about it, you know?
Right. Yeah.
And so, and we'll see next week, no spoilers here, but obviously since we keep bringing up Last of Us, you know, that will be our show next week. Ellie in that show, she's young when we first meet her, but she is very, I mean, the actor, I believe, is non-binary, but she's very sort of gender neutral in the show. She is not a traditional, like, classic feminine heroine in the mold of, like, you know, I joked about Angelina Jolie and Tomb Raider the other week. Like, that's not the vibe in Station 11 or in Last of Us, and it very much kind of is in this and in Fallout.
Yeah. Although Fallout, what helps is that they lean so heavily into the 1950s sort of feel where it's like that, like, picture perfect, but you know that it's to a cartoonish degree. And Lucy is sort of that too. So it's not just like it kind of, it works in a weird way. The fact that it's Ella Purnell with those big giant eyes, like, she's kind of like I love her and I think she's beautiful and blah blah blah, but almost cartoonishly so in this.
That's
true. That juxtaposition, it's like there's an argument to be made that it's doing something useful there in a way that with Silo, I don't know that it is.
I could see that. I will say that she has a pretty perfect face, though, and that the fact that she still looks like that after traipsing all over the apocalypse looking for her father, it's a little unrealistic, but that's okay. A couple things that I thought we should maybe talk about in relationship to the other shows, but also just in general. We did start to talk about, like, production design in this and the look of it. And then a number of these are based on something else. So the adaptation of it all, this is based on a book. So with Station 11, Fallout, and Last of Us are both based on video games, which is interesting, thinking about that. Yeah. And, I mean, I think set and setting is the same thing as talking about production design.
For sure.
So yeah, this was the first one in a while where I've been like, God damn it, I can't turn the brightness up on my TV anymore. Like, it doesn't go any brighter.
This show wants
fucking dark.
You to know it's a mystery. It's dark. There's not a single right angle.
No.
Like, everything is twisty and turny in a way that's really pleasing to look at, but is also like, okay, I get it.
Yeah.
I get it.
Yeah. The spiral staircase, like, you know, in the center is very open, but also like that feeling of like, you can't get off of it. Like the only way to get off of it is to jump, you know? The color palette is very classic, green, blue, like post-apocalyptic film. Lots of cracks in the walls to show age. Lots of dirty old technology. Yeah.
Yeah, the only real color we get in this episode is a little detail that I hadn't really noticed in my first watch of the show is their little mug battle.
Yeah.
First of all, everybody has a home decorated mug.
Just like they have paintings of each other instead of, photographs.
Yeah.
Everything's handmade.
The thing with Holston and Allison's little mugs is very sweet because it's like property of, one of the mugs says mine. It's cute that like that's a really cute shorthand to sort of set up what their relationship is. And it shows like how much this society begins to weigh on it, that they had this sort of playful back and forth.
Yeah. And like the paintings in the house of them that are sort of not super well done, but like enough that you can kind of see the resemblance.
Yeah.
I also noticed in the environment that the clothing, so apparently in the book, the clothing is more uniform. Like they're all wearing like jumpsuits basically. Yeah. But in this, they're all kind of wearing solid color, like natural fabric looking could have been rags at one point. Like there's just a certain look. And it's funny, we talked about the 3 different levels, but as you go down into the levels, like the mids and then the down deep or whatever, their clothes get more and more ragged looking and more. When she first goes down to the mids to find the computer guy, George, I wrote down, this looks like Dickensian England, because there's like,
It does.
because there's kids playing outside in like market stalls and like in their little bare feet and rags. But apparently that was based on like small alleys and streets in Barcelona.
Oh, okay.
I was like,
Barcelona.
no, that looks like Dickensian England to me.
It totally does. They're all smudged up.
Yeah, exactly.
Very funny.
They're artfully smudged.
Yeah.
But yeah, the production design, I think, it's an interesting mix, because you do have to have that classic post-apocalyptic underground vault silo look, right? But they did introduce other touches of color, like you said. I do think it's interesting, the pops of color we see, like you said, are the mugs and are the paintings and things like that. But they're also, like, one of the other big pops of color was the blood on the birth control capsule. I do think their bathrooms looked cool. That big open sliding shower with like that looked kind of neat.
Yeah, it's not the difference between watching this show and imagining living inside of it, where you don't have anything to compare it to. I don't know that they seem like they feel like oppressed by the lack of,
Right.
other than when someone gets sent out to clean.
Yeah, they must have some serious full spectrum UV lighting in there, or they would all be dead of a vitamin D deficiency.
Also that. We just have to assume that that's happening somewhere.
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, there's like street vendors on that in that section, and flags and kids playing outside. It just was like interesting to see the way they decided what middle class life would look like, working class life. You know, they're all in a shitty life. They're all in, like, it's just that you get some nicer clothing and some, you know, less hard work if you're a higher class.
Higher up. It's funny how normal the middle class does feel, though, to our, like, she just works in IT and he's a cop, and
but they're in the upper class, though.
That's a good point. You're right. Know? They are upper.
Even though, like, we would think of someone working in IT married to a cop as middle class or even working class, they're in that environment. Because when you think about who is ultimately in charge, you have judicial, you have IT, and true. And you have law enforcement. Well, that's judicial also. But then you have
well, is it?
Not really, yeah.
I mean, definitionally the way that but not here. I think it's definitely a separate.
Yeah. Yeah, it seems to me like law enforcement in the silo feels sort of like an empty hand a little bit. Like they're meant to maintain order, but they're not in charge.
Right. It's, you know, like it's like the FBI versus your small town cops. Like if the FBI comes in, it's their show. You kind of feel like that could happen. That goes back to the small town
thing about it, right? Like it feels like it's a very small town cop or small town murder situation.
I was sort of surprised. I've been trying to figure out exactly what I mean by this. Maybe you can help me. I was sort of surprised by how much everyday seeming like I remember being surprised that when when she decides she's not feeling well and she's going to take a day off, she says that there's no pushback. She's just allowed to leave. And her coworker's just like, oh, I'll let Bernard know. And that when she says, like, I'm going to go to market, like that's in a show like this where everybody feels so closely watched, even from the pilot, I was kind of surprised that she had that much freedom to move until something happens.
I always just assumed that was because she was married to Holston. That because her husband is the sheriff, she gets a little bit more leeway.
That makes sense.
Yeah, because what you end up seeing is what they would want to happen, which is that when she does find out something and she does kind of quote unquote go crazy, he is the one that's like, she's gone. Like he is the enforcer of his own wife. Yep. And that's what they would expect of him. And so I thought that was that made sense to me in terms of she's got freedom until she does something to not deserve freedom. Mm-hmm. We do get at the very end a glimpse of the Down Deep, which is, instead of being blue and green, it's like green and yellow and orange and scary and loud and dirty.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Yeah. And then that's, you know, that you get that little glimpse of Juliet Nichols at that point. And again, like you said, that's all we get of her. But when they ask what she does, I forget exactly which one of them asked, but it's like, oh, she keeps the whole silo running, basically.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, we spent all of this time. We had to get deep down to find the one person who's really the kind of literally the engine for this show and what's happening.
Well, and you realize that, I think very intentionally, you realize that, like, we think that judicial is in charge and IT is in charge, and technically they are, but like they can't do any of it without power, literal power, like electric power that she is generating by fixing that thing all the time. It's also, you get the idea of this from just that little exchange, but it becomes pretty apparent that she kind of is almost the only one who can. Yeah, which is that's a bad business model. It's a really bad business model. Yeah. And it's literally just, it's not crazy high tech, like, technology that's hard to understand. That's what I don't get. Why are the other people too dumb to understand how a generator works?
She's like really communing with it. It's the thing that you sort of get later. Is that like she can really sense.
She gets it.
It's so funny.
She gets it.
Like that stuff is a little silly to me. Yeah. It's like there might be a scene, I don't remember if there's, but there kind of might be a scene where she presses both of her hands against the outside in her ear to it.
She does she does tell people to shut up so she can listen to it at some point.
She's got to talk to it. She's got, again, back to Battlestar Galactica, she has major Starbuck vibes. Okay. For me. You would if and when we hopefully eventually watch Battlestar, you will like Starbuck. She's like trying to be what Starbuck is, I think. Okay. In this show.
The other thing I think that they're setting up with certain scenes in terms of the control that we're talking about is this sort of like rabid patriotism. Mm-hmm. The whole Freedom Day, the singing, the rituals, the, you know, once a year giving a speech about the rebellion, the play about the rebellion that she stumbles upon when she's down in the mids. Like, it's very propaganda all the time everywhere, which is to me similar to Fallout.
Yep, totally. I was thinking that too.
Yeah.
And it's the only, like, there's not a lot of like art other than those silly drawings and mugs and stuff. But like, we don't see a lot of entertainment happening except for
the play. Yeah.
The play and the music that's for that. It's all in service of celebrating Freedom Day. Right. Yeah. Which is troublesome.
Like, yeah. Yeah. It's very stratified. It's very like, everything feels very controlled. Mm-hmm. So if we were going to, I did want to talk just a little bit about the books very briefly, in thinking forward. So you and I both watched all of season 1. Season 2 is coming out probably early 2025. I will likely watch it. I think that to both of us, this show is maybe certainly not as emotionally attractive as something like Station 11. Maybe more of a slog than something like Fallout because it's so dark, but still interesting. And I think I will continue watching it. Mm-hmm. So we talked at the beginning about Hugh Howey, the author of the books. This is a part of a trilogy of novels, Wool, Shift, and Dust. And the first season of Silo covers about half, apparently, of the first book. And there are some changes from the book. Nothing, I think, as dramatic as what we talked about with Station 11. But, for example, the one thing that I found was that George, the dead boyfriend, is created for the show, possibly to soften Juliet a little bit. I think she's pretty she's a fairly hard-nosed heroine, as they said.
That's also interesting because, like I said earlier, she kind of only has one motivation in this show.
Yeah. And so it's interesting to think about how that would change what her character thinks is important if she wasn't motivated by the loss of George. So I probably won't read the books, but I am mildly curious to see where they take it from here. But I'll probably wait for the TV show to come back.
Yeah, I might read the Wikipedia.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, just that's all I really wanted to say is like the books do set up all of this stuff over three novels. And I did read that, I guess similarly to what we said with Station 11, apparently the books do answer those questions that they ask. This is not a no offense lost situation where the questions are not answered at the end. Again, like we said, it's based on a novel or novels, and so is Station 11, and so maybe there's something to that, right? Like novels are often less likely to end with a sort of ambiguous conclusion than TV and film can.
Yeah, it's interesting. Huh. Yeah, so maybe like lay off of Lost, maybe get off their back, everybody.
I knew I was going to get a reaction from that, but yeah.
But I think you're right. I think there's definitely something to that. So
yeah. And it will be interesting. So like I said, I spoiled it earlier. We are talking about Last of Us next week. So we will have then 2 book adaptations and 2 video game adaptations, all this sort of end of the world, what happens next kind of vibe. So I think we're going to have hopefully an interesting conversation about how each of them kind of handled it.
My feeling about The Last of Us, and maybe I will be wrong, is that it has more in common with Silo in terms of it's pretty standard for the genre, right?
I think so.
My feeling.
Yeah, I think where it breaks from it is that special, like, episode 3 Bill and Frank moment. I think the queerness of it is where it breaks from it a little bit, but that's not to say that there isn't. I mean, there's tons of queerness in sci-fi. It's just that it hasn't necessarily made it to TV and movie adaptations as much.
Right. Totally.
Probably based on who is doing the adapting. But, yeah. So I mentioned how the boyfriend, George, is not a character in the books. The other thing that's not in the books is that whole void, that digger void where they find the big spider looking thing. Like it does exist in the books, but it's not described really. It's not like it was created to for the television show to have another location that they could film in.
Funny.
Because it's really like, you have to be careful.
Otherwise.
You want monotony because you want to get across monotony, but you also don't want actual monotony, right? And so having the different levels, but then also having this sort of big underground water-filled void that apparently in the books, doesn't really show up as a significant location.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, it said in this article that I read, it said the origin behind the new space was Graham Yost, who's the creator of the show, was his insistence that there be another visually mysterious location that complemented the many unknowns of the silo. Because part of what you have to do when you have such a fixed location is you have to make it feel like there's, stuff around corners and secrets, and like it can't be like, okay, this is all there is. This cylinder. You have to still have mystery and like things hidden. And
it also points to like, well, if this is hidden, what else don't we know about? And that's really hard to do when something is, again, just a...
Yeah. And that has to do also, I think, with the way that they created those like alleyways, those Dickensian England looking like almost like side street feeling areas to make your imagination... believe that there's a lot more that you haven't seen or you can't see.
Right. Totally.
Yeah. They built that whole stairwell. That's an actual 360-degree set.
That's really cool.
Yeah. Yeah.
Whoa.
I think it was the director or I lost his name. Anyway, yeah, they built it says on the biggest set we had, you could walk up the spiral steps out and into an alleyway and then down another alleyway.
That's really cool.
Yeah, they built a lot of like practical sets for it.
I will say it looks pretty good. You can tell that a lot of it is computers, but it looks like pretty well done computers, you know? Like I don't think it's enough to totally take you out of it, but a lot of those like down the barrel of the silo shots and that. And like when they're letting those lanterns go, it's a really beautiful moment, but you can tell that that doesn't usually bother me.
Right. Yeah, I do think that they did as much as they, I think, could have practically.
That's cool.
Maybe we should close out Silo by just sort of thinking about the questions that we're asking at the end of the pilot. And obviously, there are questions that both of us were interested enough to keep watching. For me, at the end of the pilot, the main question to me was like, what happened when Allison went out there? Because clearly the impression or the idea that we got was that she did see beautiful, sunny nature and then collapsed, right? So what happens then when her husband goes out there to either find her body or find something else? We don't really know.
What's up with Judicial?
Yeah, what's up with Judicial?
Did George really kill himself? What happened? It's so much of it is like, yeah, they say one thing, but we know what kind of show we're watching. So what really happened at Freedom Day? Who were the rebels really? Why, if the big crime was erasing all of their history, are artifacts so forbidden now?
Yeah, exactly. Like, why is it such a crime to be curious about the past if the past being deleted was such a crime to begin with?
Right. Why, it's Allison's question too, why do people clean? Is it really, like she said, to give people hope that there's something out there?
Yeah. Why isn't Juliet gay?
Why isn't Juliet gay?
I mean, we don't know at the moment that she isn't, but...
I also have a question I was thinking a lot about when John says, you know, there hasn't been a cleaning in so long, and Holston says, or maybe it was
Holston.
Marnes, but says like, well, that's a good sign that things have been going well. The tension between, well, if things are going well, then the screen gets dirty, and that encourages people to wonder more what's on the other side.
Right.
And it compels them to act out and to maybe get themselves sent out to clean, which then shows people what's really out there, which keeps people in line. That sort of, these shows are often so much about cycles, and they only point to that one in particular just for a moment there in that conversation. Right. But it is kind of like, you don't have to show them what's out there.
Right.
And if it's there's just a little tension there that's interesting. And I wonder who is in charge of making that decision as to whether it's also, that's the other thing, whether it's real or not, whether what Allison sees in that video matters, like any of that. We really don't know who's in charge of that yet.
Yeah, because we have two different versions of what outside looks like. We have what this projection on the screen is in the silo, and then we have this video that Allison watches of like a sunny day with birds flying around. And we have to
assume that is what she really sees, because we have to assume she cleans.
Yeah.
But then she does collapse. And then if we're using our little like kind of like mystery solver skills, it seems the obvious answer is she went out, saw what was really outside, cleaned to signal that, and then they killed her anyway. Right? They make a really strong point of showing you the tape and that she's really strapped in, and so it shouldn't be anything from the outside that gets her.
But also, I think if we're using our same little mystery brains, even when I first watched this, she's wearing a helmet. And the visions that she sees when she's looking out, when she's outside, kind of seem like a screen also. Like the way it's filmed. It's filmed in a way that but looks like it's a screen over something.
Why would they want her to think that it's more beautiful out there than it really is, just to kill her anyway, if that's what's happening?
Right.
That's what I mean about the show having like being way more about mystery than people, because they are layering like questions on questions.
Yeah. I think for me, the other question that came up when I first watched the pilot, and especially now having watched Fallout, is like, are they really the only 10,000 people left on the entire planet in one silo? Come on.
Like, how do they collect everybody up?
To me, the existence of one means that there's probably others.
And we have a hint that maybe, because what is that tunnel that George and I think it's maybe just one of them who sees that in the plans. I think she's left. George keeps looking and you see that little screen with the tunnel and then it says like access denied.
Maybe,
so
but I do
where
think
are we
that
tunneling?
The plans do pop up while she's there too, so she may have seen it. But yeah, the existence of one to me implies that there could be others, and even likely are, because the idea that only one singular group of 10,000 people survived whatever happened on the surface just doesn't really track for me. So, do we ever get to see the other silos if they do exist? What's because to me, of course, because we just watched Fallout, I'm like, are they different? Like, what's going on in each one? Are there experiments? Are some of them empty and people have died off? Like, maybe someone else's power failed. Like, there's just so many other options if you start to think about them as one of many.
Yeah, I thought about that too, especially because Holston feels like he would do great in Vault 33. He's so by the books and he's so fine with it and he's so there to be in service of what he thinks is the greater good. And
yeah, totally. That'd be funny. Swap Lucy for like Juliet and see what happens.
Right?
Like, could Lucy keep the generator going?
If that was her job, she'd get good enough at it.
Wasn't she a pipe fitter?
She was a pipe fitter. She could figure it out.
She could do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And she wouldn't be all smudged up like Juliet at the end of it either.
No.
She'd be so shiny and fresh.
Yeah. But I do think that Juliet would probably let her father just go.
Yes. I think that's, again, from what little we've seen of her in this pilot, we're really making some, but I think that's probably true. Something that I always think about when something like this happens is the rule is you say I want to go out and you go out, and it's no takesies backsies. But why? Who cares? Why can't I change my mind?
That's true. I did think about this, and I think part of it must be that the worst thing that can happen in the minds of the people that run that place is the doors to the outside being opened. And so they try to limit that people's curiosity, people's desire to go outside by making it so tragic and permanent if you say the words.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, the phrasing of it, this was one thing I did struggle with this show the whole time, even when I first watched it, was like the speech that they give about we don't know what's outside, blah, blah, blah. The fact that like you have to say the words, I want to go out in that way. Like just like the way that the language is so specifically like this show. Like there's a moment where she does give like she meaning Allison gives like a blob of exposition while they're sitting at the table together, and I was like, oh, okay. Like it's in some ways I feel like this could be a smarter version of this show that I might like even more. Yeah,
maybe it is that I'm being more generous with the show than it deserves or something. But even when Mayor Johns is doing the bit where she's like, we celebrate with horns and then everybody responds. They do something. We celebrate with silence and everybody does something. Is speech act theory? Is that I'm not going to get annoying about it, or maybe I'll get a little bit annoying about it, but I think that it feels so important to the way the society runs. Speech act theory is just like when you say something happens. And there are some utterances that the happening is the utterance itself. So you're fired. Saying like I do wedding, saying I want to go out. And it really, obviously there's paperwork behind all of these things, but the meaning of it and the importance of it is in the utterance itself and in the moment when it is uttered. And in a show that is about history being fully erased and we don't have any written records at all, I want there to be more there, I think, than maybe there is. And I don't know if we're only one episode into one season of a show.
But you make a good point, because if there are no written down records of anything that anyone's allowed to see other than like the pact, whatever the fuck that is,
right,
you would think that there would be some emphasis on oral history in some way, like knowledge passed down beyond like this is the way we react to a speech, but like knowledge passed down through families. Like it just seems a little unrealistic that like if the rebels wiped out their history 140 years ago, that there was not a concerted effort to create an oral tradition of knowledge passing or something. Like that does seem like an area that is ripe for exploring in a smarter show or in this show later on. Who knows? Maybe we can give them some credit.
Right. Yeah, and I just wonder about all of that. Like future dystopia and its history in general. It just seems like something that any show that deals with it should be interested in. And maybe this is the Station 11 effect, where it's like that show is so much in a lot of ways about all of that. You know, there's the, you know, just the fact of the theater troupe wanting to, and Jodie, I want to talk about Station 11.
We're back to Station 11.
Bad.
Okay, let's put a cap on Silo. Obviously, we liked it enough to watch it. We watched it previous to this, both of us. And we'll probably watch season 2.
Yeah, okay. I think so.
What else did you want to say about Station 11 before we talk about next week?
I could talk about Station 11 forever. And the thing that I just got so excited about, I don't even want to really talk about directly because I don't want to spoil it. But what I will say is, as we're talking about, and to kind of point back to preserving history and all of that, the way Station 11 uses music, as compared to the way it looks at theater, is fascinating to me. Because they are so protective of what, like, this troupe only does Shakespeare.
Right.
In fact, there's that scene when was one of the first things I fell in love with, where the new guy is trying out and he does the Independence Day speech.
Oh, I love it. It's so good.
I don't even want to say that. I feel like everything is so delightful in this show that it's not a spoiler, but it's like, what a little moment of delight. But they're so protective. It's just Shakespeare. But then the music is all over the place.
That's true. And they they have to, obviously, but they're doing sort of other renditions of previously popular songs, you know.
And they don't have an idea, it seems, of like what's like important music versus what is just popular, versus like some of the choices are so silly.
I think there's a moment where, and I mean, I love a short run show where it's not 22 episodes or whatever, but I do think that there was more backstory with Lori Petty's character, Sarah, that related to music specifically that we didn't really get into. Yeah.
That's what I mean. Like,
yeah, because she is a classical musician, it seems. But yeah, I think that there was room within Sarah's story specifically to delve into that more. I do love that we get Tribe in there, though.
That's so good.
I mean, I always joke that it takes literally nothing to make you cry, but it takes a lot to make me cry when it comes to entertainment. And Station 11, there's at least 2 or 3 full-on sobbing moments throughout the 10 episodes. And that's saying a lot for me.
Yeah. Like, well, there are all of these, to put the Shakespeare on it, moments of catharsis where it's like, you're not necessarily crying. That's what I wonder, Jodie, is like, How often in this show are you crying just because you're sad?
I don't think ever.
Right.
I think the crying for me comes from the moments of like reunion or, you know, moments that are like, I mean, we're not going to spoil the
there's
last
one
episode,
moment that I can think of where I am just crying because my heart is breaking.
I don't even know if I had that, because there's two moments where I get really choked up, and both of them are moments of joy within a horrible situation.
Right. Well, and again, I think maybe that comes down to, this is what I mean. You're not an easy crier with this stuff. So for me, I'm always ready. But for you, the fact that it is something else that's giving you that. And I think it is those moments of catharsis, which the show is really, I think, purposefully interested in bringing about. And it's why, and they are moments that I think some people might say are a little neat, but that's almost the point of them. And I am totally okay with that in a show that is so thoughtful, and it's neat, but it's not lazy at all.
It's all a wheel.
It's all a wheel.
It's all a wheel.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, that's why, like, I sobbed at the 6 Feet Under ending, because it was sad, but it's also incredibly beautiful and joyful, and that's all I'm going to say about that, because someday you will watch it.
Someday I will. If it were 10 episodes, I'd be done, but, you know, what can you do?
I know. So I think, for now, that's it for Station 11, and also Silo, the show we were talking about this week.
Right.
So we have a few housekeeping things. First of which we've already talked about. Next week's episode will be the pilot of Last of Us. We went back and forth on whether we should do Last of Us, because the most significant episode, to me at least, was 3, not the pilot. But I think now that we've had this conversation about these other shows that are so related, it's going to be interesting to compare, to think about it with Fallout and all the others. So that will be next week. Last of Us is an HBO show, so I'm going to double check right now, but it's going to be on Max. Yes. So Last of Us is an HBO show, which you can find on Max. I don't think that if you're not inclined, if you don't have Max, I think that, like, if you love this kind of show, you've probably already watched Last of Us.
Right.
And if you don't, just come hang out with us and listen to us talk about why people should be gay or are gay, or whose gays they're playing to. Because
Jay-Z.
I mean, Pedro Pascal, like, beautiful man. Anyway, so Last of Us next week, and we just wanted to give people a heads up. Do you want to talk about what might be something to think about for the long term or next month?
Yeah. So we obviously have to talk about season 3 of The Bear, right?
It's so funny that we're going from, like, post-apocalyptic landscapes to The Bear, which is so different, but also, like, I don't know. It feels like we have to.
Yeah, I think we have to. I think we're going to try to ease people into it as best we can. We'll let you know what's happening in between. But I will say, if you're somebody who is planning to watch season 3 of The Bear, but hasn't watched, or no, actually, if you're not, I would say now is a good time to start watching The Bear. You've got plenty of time to watch seasons 1 and 2, because we are going to talk about season 3 shortly after it drops, because it's one of those shows that drops all at once. And I think we looked 10 episodes, right?
Yep, 10 episodes in season 3.
So we're going to spend a little time with The Bear.
Yeah, we are. So it's actually going to be like a 3-week run. So just so folks know, The Bear comes out, season 3 comes out on June 27th. Our June 26th episode will be a conversation about a little bit about the pilot, just to kind of keep with our theme here, but then also a bit of a recap of seasons 1 and 2. The July 3rd episode, we'll be talking about season 3, episodes 1 through 5. And then the July 10th episode will be season 3, episodes 6 through 10. So
that should be pretty manageable, I think, for folks. You've got plenty of time to get, like I said, through seasons 1 and 2, and then you can watch along with us. Which is what we'll remind you next week.
The seasons are about 10 episodes each.
And they're short.
They're shorter episodes. Yeah, a lot of them are half hour. I think only one of them, the one with the family in season 2, is like almost an hour, but usually they're a bit shorter.
And in fact, there's one episode that I can't wait for us to spend a little time talking about that is like around 15 minutes long, and it's so good.
Absolutely. And if you're one of our friends that came over here from New Jersey is the world, there is a weird food kinship relationship, in my opinion, between New Jersey and Chicago. Like, we have our things that we love and care a lot about in the food world. So does Chicago. But there's also this like sort of blue collar food worker,
Yes,
like,
that's what it really is to me, I think.
That anyone who grew up in Jersey and worked in a deli, like me, or a bagel shop, you know that vibe.
Yeah.
Right?
I don't know if we've ever talked about this. I have never worked in a deli, but my mom almost exclusively worked in delis. So I came up like childcare, you know what I mean? Like in the summer and stuff was often me in the back room of the delis. Like, so it's not the Bear isn't about a deli. It's about a sandwich shop, but it's similar.
Still.
And it's also the Bear does such a good job of this. It's like everybody's a little bit Italian. Like,
exactly.
So I do also love that. It just feels like there's you could have a show like The Bear. People from Chicago are going to hate that I'm saying this, but you could have a show like The Bear set in New Jersey, and it wouldn't be totally different.
No, just put it in an Italian sandwich shop.
Right, exactly.
That's like, yeah, absolutely. Or
actually, just change the accent that everybody's doing a little bit.
Yeah, but actually, The Bear, but set in like like Belmont Tavern.
Would totally work.
Or like some other sort of pizza red sauce joint.
Yeah.
Would be fucking perfect.
Yeah. It's basically
somebody get on that. So to tell Geff.
Yeah, we need to steal. The Bear needs to franchise.
Oh, I love it. Yeah. So season 1 of The Bear is only 8 episodes. Season 2, I believe, is 10, and season 3 will be 10. So totally bingeable. If you haven't watched it already, I'm sure you've heard how good it is.
If you haven't watched it because you don't want to hear, this is the criticism I've heard from people who have not watched the show, that they don't need to hear, they hear it's very stressful, and that they don't need to hear a bunch of guys yelling at each other, a bunch of like, and I that's kind of fair, but it's also, it's certain episodes are heavier on that than others. But even when that's happening, it's a show that's so full of love. It just really... It feels really warm to me the whole time, even when it's even when more difficult stuff is going on. It's so also not like Station 11, but it's so human. It feels so real. I would take a bullet for just about anybody on that show.
Especially Marcus.
Of course.
Yeah. And season 2, oh God, just talk about crying for like reasons of joy. Oh, real quick, did you find a Jersey connection with Silo? Because mine is so desperate.
No, not a single one. No.
Okay, since we just brought up Jersey,
I guess the Silo could be in Jersey. We don't know.
It isn't, but yes, it could be. I know where it theoretically is. This is so sad. And I looked. My only Jersey connection for this is hold on, Rashida Jones, who plays Allison, obviously, Ann Perkins, is married to the lead singer of Vampire Weekend, Ezra Koenig.
Oh, I don't know if I knew that.
I didn't either. This was the only Jersey connection I found. Rashida Jones married to Ezra Koenig. I think that's how you pronounce his last name. I don't know.
Yeah, if he's like Sarah Koenig, that's how you pronounce it.
That's exactly right. Yes. My reference was Sarah Koenig. He was born in New York, but he is from Glenridge, New Jersey. He went to Glenridge High School. That's all I got.
We'll have to allow it.
It's the only thing I have. So
yeah. There you go. You did it. Thank you so much for doing your due diligence.
You're so welcome.
And bringing that here, because I could not find a single thing. No,
I know. We'll see what we can get with Last of Us next week. But I'm sure that pretty soon, when we get to The Bear, we will find it. It's got to be there.
I have faith in it.
If nothing else, we can just compare it to the upcoming Red Sauce Joint show by Chris Gethard and Don Finelli called Louie's or
perfect.
Tony's Pizza. All right. Well, that's going to do it for us this week. And, where can they find us?
We're at WatchersPodNJ on Instagram and WatchersPodNJ at Gmail if you want to tell us something.
Yeah, tell us something. What'd you have for lunch today?
I would love for folks to just email us what they had for lunch today.
I would too.
Yeah.
I would too.
I haven't had lunch yet, or I would tell you guys what I have for lunch today.
What am I going to have for lunch today? Probably, honestly,
question.
probably a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. You can find me on Instagram at Jodie_Mim.
And I'm at AQ Andrea Q.
And we will see you next week in the apocalypse again. In the mushrooms. In and amongst the mushrooms.
Gross. Is that Kennett Square? That's a great Pennsylvania joke.
I missed it.
It's Kennett Square is where all the mushrooms are grown, and if you drive through Kennett Square, it is like overpowering.
So yeah, you're not going to want to go there after you watched.
It's a real mushroom town. I can't wait to talk about fungus.
Oh my god! Well, get strapped in because you're going to have a lot to talk about.
Hell yeah!
All right, we'll see you next week.
Bye.
Bye.